So the I guess the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. Alexi wanted to talk about the college debt situation.
Okay.
So like indentured, he mentioned quote unquote indentured servitude, right?
And that's
So
exactly what it is.
right. So can you explain that? How is the college experience similar to indentured servitude?
Well, first, let me explain what indentured servitude is. I'm going to put on my historian's hat for a minute. Indentured servitude was a practice that existed in earlier times, in past cultures and past societies. Back in the day when we still had things like slavery, we also had something called indentured servitude. And being an
Slavery light.
indentured Uh, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, indentured servitude is not quite as bad as actual slavery, but it's slavery light. Yeah. What typically would happen with indentured servitude is that you would have to go into an enormous amount of debt to get a job. Basically, you would have to pay someone to hire you for a job, but you couldn't pay them what they wanted. So it would be debt, which basically meant you worked for them for free until your debt is paid off. Um, or if you're not working for free, you have a loan that's so large, it's going to take forever to pay it off, and the interest rates are really high, or something comparable to that. Indentured servitude. This was a widely practiced thing in a lot of older societies.
And I guess
Uh,
people were because if you told somebody, you're signing up for slavery light, people would how do you convince people that this is something that
well, in those days, people didn't have any choice. It was just like if you were in older societies, if you were a slave, you were usually born a slave, or you were made into a slave basically through kidnapping, or being a prisoner of war or something. Indentured servants were people who had no means of making a living, so they basically had to sell themselves into what amounted to slavery in order to feed themselves and
like
things like
skillless
that.
labor, people with no skill.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Yeah, and indentured servants were usually either low skilled or no skilled laborers, or very lightly skilled laborers. And yeah, you would basically agree to work for an employer as their de facto slave until your debt was paid off, and you could theoretically work your way out of indentured servitude, and some people did. So it wasn't as bad as slavery, but it was the next thing to being a slave. Uh, so it was a bad situation to be in, yes. And indentured servitude was widely practiced in older societies. But the student loan system works in a fairly similar way, um, because to go to college, particularly nowadays, college tuitions have really increased by an order of magnitude exponentially in the last 10 to 15 years. But and they get higher all the time. So most people cannot afford to go to college and pay for college tuition. Maybe they can go to a community college or something like that, but they're not going to go to a normal 4-year university and pay out of their own pocket. That's not possible. Um, Back in the 1960s, you could go to college as a student and pay your own way with a part-time job. Back in the 60s, college tuition was maybe $100 a semester. Uh, it's a lot more than that for a credit hour nowadays.
Right.
So, so, um,
Yeah, I remember
so
I had to take like this class. It was like a math class, and it was I was studying in psychology, so the math class was just like a prereq or like one of those requirements that I had to take, just the general studies. So I ended up taking it in community college to save some money, and I think the class was going to cost me $5,000 for with the credits, and then I paid like $500 in community college. I was like, oh my god, yeah,
yeah. Uh, but community college today is really just a glorified high school. It's like, and even undergrad at 4-year universities is graduate is like a glorified high school. So the quality of education is actually going down, and the value of a college degree is actually going down, even as the cost of it is going up. Um, I mean, so that's not normal economics there. Normal economics is the more valuable something becomes, the more expensive it becomes. With
Right.
college degrees, they're becoming more expensive, less valuable. Right.
Mm.
And that's how indentured servitude enters into it. To go to college today, you pretty much have to go and take out student loans. And usually you have to get them from the government because most people cannot afford to go to college out of their own pocket. Most people don't qualify for scholarships. They don't give scholarships to just anybody. And then private loans are difficult to get because you have to have collateral and things like that for a private loan. All right, the government loans, or the federal government loans, are really the only way that most people can pay to go to college, realistically speaking. So consider this: the average college tuition at a 4-year college is going to be from anywhere from $25,000 to $75,000, depending on the school. There are some that are even higher. There are some that are even more. But as a general rule, I would say, for example, one of the schools where I teach, the tuition I think is currently about $26,000 a year. It may have gone up. It may be more like $30,000. There's
Wow.
another 4-year university in my local area where the tuition I think is $50,000 to $60,000 a year.
So you're
And
paying
even that is low
200,000,
compared. Even
240
that
for
is
the
low.
4 years.
Yeah, even so, yeah, we're looking at a situation where if you go to school part-time, I mean, if you go to school full-time and finish your 4-year degree, you're looking at a student loan debt of anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 when you leave. Right. So nowadays you have a lot of students that are going to college maxing out on student loans. Particularly if you go to graduate schools and doctoral programs and that kind of thing are even more expensive. Yeah, I mean, you're not, and like I said, because an undergrad degree is a new high school diploma, then to really be considered a college educated person today and have a marketable degree, you have to have a graduate degree, a master's degree. All right. So we're not talking about 4 years of school, we're talking about 6 or 8 years of school. And like I said, the only way a normal person is going to pay for that, unless they have wealthy parents or something like that, is by student loans. So you're going to end up maxing out on student loans. You're going to end up, and then you'll probably have to get some other loans or along the way. All right. So you're going to end up with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. And the interest rates on student loans are also high. It's compound interest. It accumulates over time. One thing, though, about student loans that really makes them a matter of indentured servitude is that you cannot take personal bankruptcy on student loans. That's one of the few debts that you cannot take personal bankruptcy on. The only other debts that you cannot take personal bankruptcy on are taxes, child support, and criminal fines, like speeding tickets and things like that, or tickets for a fine for getting in a fight and getting an assault charge. All right, so other than criminal fines, child support, and taxes, you can take personal bankruptcy on mortgages, on car debt, on all kinds of debt, credit cards, but you can't take them on student loans. So special student loans are a special category of debt. All right. Now, in these other forms of debt that you can't take bankruptcy on, taxes are considered a matter of civic responsibility, civic obligation. All right. Child support is considered a matter of personal responsibility to care for your own children, and fines are considered punishment for having committed an offense. All right. But student loans are, technically college. Most people would think that college education would be like no different than a car, no different than a house. It's something that you need to advance in life, to care for your needs and things like that. But the only way you're going to get a college education is with lots of student loan debt for most people. There may be some exceptions. There are some people, maybe the military will pay for it, at least part of it. But for most people, the only thing you're going to get is the only way you're going to get a college education, particularly graduate education, is through student loan debt, which means you are an indentured servant because you're going to have a high five-figure, six-figure debt that cannot be discharged in personal bankruptcy. And that
Wow.
stays with you until the last penny is paid back.
Well, so indentured servitude, you basically take out, it's like a sort of a loan, right? You take out a loan, or what do you get in return if you're an indentured servant? Like, what is you get a food, house? What was the deal usually?
A room and board until your debt's paid off. And it might take years for your debt to be paid off.
It almost seems like you're better off as an indentured servant because with the degree, you take out a loan, and then you have to pay for your room and board, and then you still owe the money at the end.
Well, being an indentured servant was a harder life because the social conditions and economic conditions were different. But conceptually, it's the same thing. It's basically with the student loans, they pay for your education. And then from there on, it's up to you to actually go get a job where you're actually going to generate income to start making payments on your debt.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, if you can't get a job, tough luck.
Right.
Some people who have degrees, even advanced degrees, never find a suitable job where they can really make payments like they're supposed to on their student loan debt. For instance, what you often find in particular nowadays is that you have younger people who go to college straight out of high school, get their 4-year degree, go on to graduate school, get an advanced degree. So by the time they come out of that, they're say in their late 20s. Then they will go to places where they can hopefully use their degrees, which means the larger cities like DC, New York, LA, San Francisco, Atlanta, places like that. And they may succeed in getting a corporate job or a government job or something like that. But even though they have a professional level job, due to the cost of housing in large cities and due to their student loan payments, they're still broke. What you will often find is you will find young urban professional people who are say in their late 20s and early 30s in places like DC, New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas, who maybe have a $100,000 a year income. All right, if you're making $100,000 a year income, after about 30,000 of that's going to go for taxes, realistically, in most jurisdictions. Sometimes more. But let's say
you have 70.
Huh?
So you're at 70.
Then you're at 70. Okay. Realistically speaking, rent in most of those places is going to be $2,500 a month, and that's getting off easy. It can be as high as pushing 4,000. Like in the Bay Area, rent can be something like $3,700 a month.
Oh.
All right, so let's say you're paying. Let's say you get off easy, and you're paying $2,500 a month rent. Okay, that's another $30,000 a year right there for rent. So that leaves you with $40,000 for the year. Okay, if you have 6-figure student loan debts, your payment on that technically is probably going to be in the $1,500 range per month. I mean, you can get on payment plans where it's a little lower and things like that. But we're talking paying another
18,000 for the year.
Yeah, $18,000 a year in student loan payments. Okay, that means you've got about $22,000 a year to live off of. All right, after you pay rent and student loan debt. Okay, all right, $20,000. That's not even $500 a week. That's like
1,800 a month.
Yeah. I mean, if you try living on New York City, on $450 a week, after taxes and rent and student loan payments. Plus, if you work a professional level job, if you work a professional level job, you're expected to dress nice and that kind of thing because we have to buy clothes. So what happens?
65 a day, $65 a day.
Right. I mean, yeah,
discretionary.
that's not even food for a day in some of these jurisdictions. In some of these
Oh my gosh.
in some American cities, taking an Uber or a Lyft or a cab to work and buying food is going to cost you almost $65 a day, right? So we're talking about professional level people who are basically living in destitution. And some of
And
them
if you
get
make 100K, you're like in the top 10% of people, I think, in America,
right,
right?
right, exactly.
Sheesh.
There are people today who work in the tech industry in the Bay Area, and who have professional level jobs and who literally live in vehicles. I mean, these are people who go to work and work in the tech industry during the day. They have jobs and relatively high paying jobs. They still can't afford rent. All right, because they're making, $70,000 a year, say. All right. Well, rent is $3,500 a month.
Right.
All right. That's your entire salary. Your salary doesn't even, I mean, your after tax salary is barely going to even cover that. So yeah, you have people who are in some places are living in vehicles.
So you're
I know
effectively
of a
living to
case.
work
Yeah,
in in basic conditions, if not substandard conditions, even if you're making top 10% of income.
right. And what a lot of these people will do is that they will take out a whole lot of credit cards, and after they pay for their student loans and rent and taxes, they put everything else on a credit card and they run up these massive credit card debts. So that's yet another debt. Uh, so they, in addition to student loans, they've got credit card debt now. Yeah, so bankruptcies are at an all-time high now. More and more people are taking bankruptcy, and that's why, because they have all these debts.
So just to be clear, with an indentured servant, you're taking out a loan and then you're basically exchanging years of your life in order to pay it back for
Right,
room and board. And with a student loan, you're taking out a loan for, and hopefully you'll get a degree, but you're basically paying it back because you got to pay back the loan with years of your life, and you're not coming out ahead because you're just surviving basically.
right, exactly. At the same time, to get a job, you're increasingly expected to have not only a college degree, but an advanced degree.
Okay, so I guess going back to your situation, did you realize it was like this when you started?
Uh, Somewhat. I didn't know how bad it was, and it's gotten worse since then. I would point out it's gotten a lot worse since then.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with academia goes back as far as 35 years. So it's gotten a lot worse over time. Um, and it's at an all-time worse now. It's as bad as it's ever been.
Were you able to figure out a way to escape? How did you deal with? Well, I guess because you had to pay for the 2 degrees. Did you pay out of pocket for those? The two undergraduates and then the two
No,
graduates.
no. Uh, I did it through a combination of Pell Grants, student loans, stipends, and I have student loan debt today as well. I make payments on student loan debt every month.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know, I didn't certainly did not come out of that debt free.
Mm-hmm. Dang. Man, okay, so how do you is there a way to go to college and then avoid being an indentured servant? Like how do you beat the system? Is it possible?
Well, to get your undergrad degree, you want to figure out how to do it as cheaply as possible. And that means you need to get the bulk of your degree. As you need to take as many classes as possible at a community college, where tuition is cheaper. Uh, and if you can do it online, that helps as well, because you don't actually have to go to a physical school and pay for room and board and things like that if you're going to live there, or even if it's a local school, you don't have to commute, and have vehicle and fuel costs and things like that, which is also expensive. So it's best to get your undergrad education either from a community college or from an online school to the greatest degree possible.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then same thing with graduate school. Once you finish your undergrad education, it's best to do graduate school the same way. Go to an online school if possible. Go to a local school if possible, not something where you have to live there, not something where there's a long commute and you're running up a lot of fuel costs and that kind of thing.
When I guess in the past, people did their indentured servitude, they would complete their X amount of years of labor, and then did they have a future after? Like, what was their strategy?
Well, no, I mean, the best you could hope for as a indentured servant is that someday you would just become an independent laborer. So you would be like what we would today call a wage worker. You know, you would go from being a semi-slave to being something like one of today's Walmart workers or something. You know,
So you're in a better position than a college student as a Walmart employee. Oh man.
If you're a debt-free Walmart employee, yeah, you probably have a higher net worth than the average college graduate.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of college graduates, people with advanced degrees, who need about $200,000 just to be broke.
Right.
Like I remember years ago, I worked for a company. It was the multi-level marketing company that sold health and dental plans. But one of the owners of that company, he had previously had another company that had failed. And when that company failed, he was in debt, $350,000 in back taxes. And he said, yeah, so then he started his new company, and that company was successful, at least for a time. Well, he's still personally successful. But he said, yeah, he used to say when I started this company, I needed $350,000 just to be broke, just to break even and have nothing. Yeah.
Wow.
And
check out the full interview on our YouTube page, Academic Writing Composition. We also have PhDs, professors, and ghostwriters available to help consult on a class or complete any writing assignment you may have. Contact us at academiccomposition.com.